that stretched from the cold shores of Britain to the scorching deserts of Egypt, an empire with roads that connected 3 continents, aqueducts that defied gravity, and legions that could crush any army that dared to challenge them. This was Rome at its peak, the undisputed master of the known world, a civilization so advanced that many of its innovations wouldn't be matched for over 1,000 years. Now imagine that same empire, just a few centuries later, reduced to a shadow of its former glory. The legions disbanded, the cities crumbling, the economy in ruins, and wave after wave of so-called barbarian tribes walking through what were once impenetrable borders as if they were open doors. What happened? How does the greatest superpower in history fall so completely, so catastrophically, that it would take Europe a millennium to recover? If you went to school in the Western world, you were probably taught that Rome fell because of barbarian invasions. The Visigoths sacked Rome in 410 AD, and the last Western Roman emperor was deposed in 476 AD. Case closed. Right. Barbarians won. Rome lost. End of story. But here's the problem with that explanation. It's not wrong. Exactly, it's just incomplete. It's like saying someone died because their heart stopped. Technically true, but it doesn't answer the real question. Why did their heart stop? What was the underlying disease that made the collapse inevitable? Because here's what they do and teach you in most history classes. The barbarians didn't defeat Rome. They inherited the corpse. By the time the Visigoths showed up at Rome's gates, the empire had already destroyed itself from within. And the weapon it used wasn't a sword or a siege engine. It was something far more insidious, something that has destroyed empires throughout history and continues to threaten nations today. It was money, or more specifically, the deliberate destruction of money. Today, we're going to dive deep into the real reason Rome fell, not because of barbarians, not because of moral decay, not because of Christianity or lead pipes or any of the other explanations you might have heard. We're going to follow the money, because that's where the true story lies. And I'm going to warn you right now, this story is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable because the same forces that destroyed Rome are at work in our world today. The same mistakes that Roman emperors made in the 3rd century are being repeated by modern governments, and if we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it. Let's start with a simple question. How do you pay for an empire? In Rome's case, the answer for centuries was conquest. Every time Rome conquered a new territory, it gained access to new resources, land, slaves, gold, silver, grain. The conquest of Gaul brought massive amounts of gold. The conquest of Egypt secured Rome's grain supply. The conquest of Dacia gave Rome access to some of the richest gold and silver mines in the ancient world. For hundreds of years, Rome was essentially a self-financing military machine. War paid for war, conquest funded conquest. But here's the catch. Eventually, you run out of places to conquer. By the 2nd century AD, Rome had reached its natural limits. To the north were the forests of Germania, difficult to conquer, expensive to hold, and not particularly valuable. To the east was the Parthian Empire, later the Sassanid Persian Empire, a military power that could actually fight Rome to a standstill. To the south was the Sahara Desert. To the west was the Atlantic Ocean. Rome's expansion had stopped, but its expenses hadn't. Think about what it takes to maintain an empire the size of Rome. You need a massive standing army to defend thousands of miles of borders. You need a bureaucracy to govern millions of people speaking dozens of different languages. You need roads, bridges, aqueducts, ports, and fortifications. You need to keep the population of Rome itself happy with free grain and entertainment, the famous bread and circuses. You need to maintain the imperial court, the senate, the provincial governors, and countless other officials. All of this costs money. Enormous amounts of money. In the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, Rome could afford it. The empire was wealthy, trade was booming, and the silver mines of Spain and the gold mines of Dacia were still productive. But by the 3rd century, cracks were starting to show. The mines were being depleted. Trade was disrupted by wars and piracy. Plague had devastated the population, reducing the tax base, and yet the expenses kept growing. Rome faced a dilemma that every government in history has faced at some point. We need more money than we have. How do we get it? There were really only 3 options. Option 1. Raise taxes. But Rome's tax system was already pushing the limits of what people could pay, and raising taxes further would risk rebellion. Option 2. Cut spending. But that would mean reducing the size of the army, which was politically impossible and militarily suicidal. Or Option 3. Find a clever way to create more money without raising taxes or cutting spending. The Roman emperors chose Option 3, and it was the beginning of the end. What they discovered was one of the most dangerous economic tricks in history, a trick that would be repeated by countless governments over the next 2,000 years, always with the same disastrous results. It's called currency debasement, and it works like this. You take your coins, which are supposed to be made of pure silver, and you mix in cheaper metals like copper or bronze. Same coin, same face value, but less actual silver inside. At first, it seems like genius. You can mint more coins without mining more silver. You can pay the army, fund the bureaucracy, and keep the empire running without raising taxes. It's free money, right, wrong, dead wrong. And over the next section, we're going to see exactly how this decision, made by desperate emperors trying to save their empire, ended up destroying it instead. Because what starts as a clever accounting trick always ends in economic catastrophe. Let's talk about how currency debasement actually works, because understanding the mechanics is crucial to understanding why it's so destructive. When Rome was founded, its currency, the denarius, was made of pure silver. Well, almost pure. The earliest denarii were about 95 to 98% silver, with just a tiny bit of copper mixed in for durability. This wasn't a trick. Pure silver is actually too soft to make practical coins, so a little copper made them more durable without significantly changing their value. But here's the key. Everyone knew what the standard was. Merchants, soldiers, farmers. Everyone understood that a denarius contained a certain amount of actual silver. That's what gave it value. You could melt down a denarius and use the silver for something else if you wanted. The coin wasn't just a token, it was actual wealth in a convenient, portable form. This system worked beautifully for hundreds of years. But then came Emperor Nero, and everything changed. In 64 AD, Nero reduced the silver content of the denarius from about 95% to 90%. 5% doesn't sound like much, right? But here's what it meant in practice. Nero could now mint 10% more coins from the same amount of silver. If he had 100 pounds of silver, he used to be able to make 100 pounds worth of denarii. Now he could make 110 pounds worth. Instant profit, or so it seemed. What Nero discovered, and what every government that has tried this trick has discovered, is that you can't fool the market. Merchants aren't stupid. They could tell the coins had less silver. They could weigh them, test them, compare them to the old coins. And when they realized the coins were worth less, they did the rational thing. They raised their prices. Think about it from a merchant's perspective. You're selling grain. Last year, you got 10 good silver coins for a bushel of grain. This year, people are offering you 10 coins, but each coin has 10% less silver in it. Are you going to accept the same number of coins? Of course not. You're going to want 11 coins to make up for the missing silver. You're not being greedy. You're just trying to get the same amount of actual value you got before. This is inflation, and once it starts, it's almost impossible to stop. Here's what happened over the next 2 centuries. Nero started it by reducing silver content to 90%. His successors continued the process. By 100 AD, the denarius was 85% silver. By 200 AD, it was 50% silver. By 250 AD, it was barely 5% silver, essentially a copper coin with a thin silver coating that would wear off after a few transactions. Let me put that in perspective. In the year 64 AD, a denarius was 95% silver. By the year 60 AD, less than 200 years later, it was 5% silver. The Roman government had reduced the value of its currency by 95%. Imagine if the dollar lost 95% of its value in your lifetime. That's what happened to Rome, and prices, predictably, went through the roof. We have records showing that prices in the Roman Empire increased by over 1,000% during the 3rd century. A bag of grain that cost 8 denarii at the start of the century cost over 100 denarii by the end. The same pattern repeated across the economy. Food, clothing, tools, land, everything became exponentially more expensive. But the poor and the middle class were devastated. If you were a soldier earning a fixed salary of, say, 100 denarii per year, you were in serious trouble. Your salary stayed the same, still 100 denarii, but that 100 denarii bought less and less every year. By the end of the 3rd century, a soldier's salary was essentially worthless. It might buy you a week's worth of food if you were lucky. This created a catastrophic problem for the empire. The army, the very foundation of Roman power, was being impoverished by the government's monetary policy. Soldiers who could barely afford to feed themselves weren't going to be loyal, disciplined, or effective. They started looking for other sources of income, looting, extortion, or supporting military coups in exchange for promises of better pay. And that's exactly what happened. The 3rd century AD is known as the crisis of the 3rd century for a reason. In a span of just 50 years to 35 to 284 AD, Rome had over 50 different emperors. Most of them were generals who seized power by force, ruled for a few months or years, and were then murdered by the next general who wanted to take a turn. The empire fragmented into competing factions. Provinces declared independence. The borders collapsed. The money destroyed the military. The military destroyed political stability. Political instability destroyed the economy. The economy destroyed the tax base. The collapsing tax base forced the government to debase the currency even more. And round it went, each problem making the others worse, in a death spiral that consumed one of history's greatest civilizations. By the time the barbarians showed up, Rome wasn't an empire anymore. It was a zombie, already dead, but still shambling around. The Visigoths, the Vandals, the Huns, they didn't conquer Rome so much as they carved up the remains. And here's the truly terrifying part. This wasn't some mysterious, unavoidable disaster. It wasn't a natural catastrophe or an unforeseeable plague. The Roman government did this to itself, deliberately, repeatedly, for over 200 years. Every emperor who debased the currency knew what the previous emperor's debasement had caused. They did it anyway, because in the short term, it solved their immediate problem. They got more money to spend. The long-term consequences. That was the next emperor's problem. Sound familiar? Now let's talk about why this matters today. Because if this were just a history lesson about something that happened 2,000 years ago, it would be interesting, but not particularly urgent. The problem is, we're watching the same story unfold right now, in real time, across multiple countries around the world. Let's start with the most obvious example, Venezuela. In the year 2000, Venezuela was one of the wealthiest countries in South America. It had the world's largest proven oil reserves. Its currency, the bolivar, was stable and strong. A typical Venezuelan family could afford a comfortable middle-class lifestyle, a home, a car, vacations, savings for the future. Fast forward to 2018, Venezuela's annual inflation rate hit 1 million%. 1 million%. The government was printing so much money that the currency became literally worthless. People used bolivar notes as napkins because it was cheaper than buying actual napkins. A cup of coffee that cost 5 bolivars in 2012 cost 1 million bolivars in 2018. Teachers and doctors, who had been solidly middle class, were digging through garbage looking for food. How did this happen? The Venezuelan government, like the Roman emperors, faced a simple problem. They wanted to spend more money than they had. Rather than make the difficult choices, cut spending, or raise taxes, they chose the seemingly easy path: print more money. Just like Rome debasing its coins, Venezuela printed more bolivars. And just like in Rome, the result was catastrophic inflation, economic collapse, and social disintegration. Or look at Zimbabwe in the late 2000s. At its peak, Zimbabwe's inflation rate reached 89.7 sextillion% per month. That's 89,700,000,000,000,000,000,000,000%. They printed $100 trillion notes that couldn't buy a loaf of bread. The entire monetary system collapsed. The country eventually abandoned its own currency and started using US dollars and South African rand instead. Or Weimar Germany in the 1920s, where people famously carried wheelbarrows full of cash to buy groceries, and children played with stacks of worthless banknotes as building blocks. The pattern is always the same. A government faces financial pressure. It chooses to print money, or in ancient times, debase the coinage rather than make hard choices. Inflation accelerates. The middle class is destroyed. Social stability collapses, and the end result is either hyperinflation, currency collapse, or both. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, but modern economies are different. We have central banks, we understand monetary policy, we have sophisticated tools to manage the money supply. We're not like those ancient Romans or those failed states. Maybe, but consider this. In 1971, the United States removed the last link between the dollar and gold. Since then, the money supply has grown exponentially. The Federal Reserve can essentially create unlimited dollars at will. And while the US has not experienced hyperinflation yet, the dollar has lost over 85% of its purchasing power since 1971. What you could buy with $1 in 1971 now costs over $6. Is this the same as Roman currency debasement? Not exactly. The mechanisms are different, but the fundamental principle is the same. The government is creating more money to cover its expenses, and the result is that each unit of money is worth less. And it's not just the US, the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of England, central banks around the world have been creating unprecedented amounts of new money, especially since the 2008 financial crisis and the 2020 pandemic. This is often called quantitative easing, but it's really just a modern, more sophisticated version of what Rome did. So, what's the lesson here? What should we, as individuals, learn from Rome's catastrophic experiment with currency debasement? First, understand that inflation is not a natural phenomenon like the weather. It's a policy choice. When prices rise dramatically, it's almost always because the money supply has been increased dramatically. The Romans chose to debase their currency. Venezuela chose to print bolivars. These were decisions made by governments, not unavoidable natural disasters. Second, understand that the people who suffer most from inflation are the ones who can least afford it. The wealthy can protect themselves. They own real assets like land, businesses, stocks, and gold. These assets tend to maintain or even increase their value during inflation. But if you're middle class or poor, if your wealth is mostly in your salary and your savings account, inflation is a silent thief that steals your purchasing power day by day. Third, recognize the warning signs. When a government is running large deficits and increasing the money supply rapidly, pay attention. When you start hearing phrases like "we can print our own money," or "debt doesn't matter," or "inflation is transitory," remember Rome. Remember Venezuela. Remember Zimbabwe. So, what can you do? How do you protect yourself if you see these patterns emerging? Diversify out of pure cash holdings. This doesn't mean you should have no cash. Emergency funds are important. But consider allocating some of your wealth to assets that hold value during inflation. Real estate, stocks in productive businesses, commodities, even precious metals. These are things that have intrinsic value beyond what the government says they're worth. Invest in skills and knowledge that will remain valuable regardless of what happens to the currency. Education, trade skills, useful expertise. These can't be inflated away. And perhaps most importantly, study history. The story of Rome's monetary collapse in ancient history. It's a warning. It's a pattern that has repeated itself dozens of times across different cultures and different eras. And if we don't learn from it, we'll get to watch it happen again in our own lifetimes. Rome didn't fall because of barbarians. Rome fell because its leaders made a choice to debase the currency, to sacrifice long-term stability for short-term convenience, to pass the costs of today's problems onto tomorrow's generation. And eventually, tomorrow came. The question isn't whether modern governments will face similar temptations. They already do. The question is whether we, as citizens, will recognize the pattern and demand better, or whether we'll repeat Rome's mistake and watch our own economic foundations crumble. The money destroyed Rome. Don't let it destroy your future.